In this podcast, you'll hear great conversations, testimonies, life-changing stories that will edify your life and your walk with God. So without further ado, welcome to the Good Things Podcast, where we talk about the good things of God. May this bless your life. In today's episode, I'm sitting down with my pastor, Lark Lewis, for the first installment of a special conversation about his journey into ministry. We'll talk about how God called him, his experiences that shaped his faith, and the steps that led him to where he is today. This is part one of our conversation, where we focus on the beginning of his ministry story. I hope you'll be encouraged and inspired as you hear how God has worked throughout his life. Let's get started. Does that feel good?
Yeah, that's better.
So I wanted to do this because me and Tracy were up here and she was singing and you showed up and you started singing, made her really nervous. But you said that you used to sing when you would evangelize.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought to myself, a lot of us would want to know what that looked like because you're our pastor and we all think you're the best pastor in the world.
Well,
But we want to see into the history of what it was like you evangelizing. But before we get there, I want to know a little bit. We talked about it in the very first episode, but I want to ask about like your childhood and what it was like growing up in a pastor's home. I want to hear from you. Like what did that look like?
all right. Well, I think it was pretty natural because I really didn't know anything different, And so, being raised in it, we went to church all the time. Uh, I was in actually two different churches that I grew up with. I was as a child up until I was about 7 years old. We were in a town. My dad had built a church in this town in Parma, Missouri. And, of course, I don't remember that much about it, but I do remember some of the people there and services and stuff. And that was till I was 7 years old. That was, I think, 1965, I believe it was, that we moved to Morehouse, which my grandfather pastored there. And my mother's dad and mother, they pastored there for 20 years. Well, he passed away, and my dad, they elected him as the pastor. He had built the building. My dad was a carpenter as well as a farmer and preacher and pastor, and he had built two or three churches my dad had. And so growing up, we moved to Morehouse, and uh, church was old. I mean, it'd been there for a long time. Dad had built a new building. He built it for my grandfather. My grandfather died, so first service was my grandfather was in it, and that was his funeral. And so from that time on, just growing up, I really, a lot of people say, what was it there? To me, it was normal because
Right.
that was the only thing I knew. It was just I didn't know anything else but church. And so we went, and I've mentioned before from the pulpit, we had Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, Sunday night, as every week. And then we were going places on Friday night for youth rallies and whatever. It's a small town. There wasn't really anything else going on. You was either going to church or you was on drugs or something,
Yeah.
And young people that were on drugs that wasn't in the church. But we had a big youth group, even it was a small town, but we ran, close to 200 or so, and it was a town of 1,000 people. And so our youth group was big, and so we were all the time, doing stuff and going to rallies and all this kind of stuff. So it was, I don't think it was, I don't look at it as any kind of hard or regrets or anything like that. It just, it was like, I mean, that's all I ever knew. And it was really, I had a lot of, my mom, my dad, uh, they, they were just loving God and taking us places. We went to general conferences. We went to camp meetings. We went to, it was just all the time, church everywhere. And, and I never did say, man, why are we going to church all the time? That was just
Life.
normal. I didn't think there was anything else outside that, really. It was just, so, and like I said, when we didn't have church, we was trying to find a place to go to church. So it was just kind of a, you know, but into that is what really created, the call and the desire to do what I have done all of my life, basically.
You said that y'all went to church how many days a week?
Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, Sunday, and Sunday night, 5 days,
Wow.
5 times a week.
What kind of farmer was your dad?
He was soybeans. They planted soybeans, cotton, that type of thing.
So I ask this question because I think about in my own personal life, I try to like really prioritize what's going on and the things of God. And I can't imagine how much he had on his plate, how many times I went to church a week, being a pastor, everything that comes with pastoring, um, counseling, Bible studies, sermons, preaching, teaching, and being a soybean farmer.
Yeah.
How do you think he managed all of that?
Well, the farm where he farmed was about 35 miles from the church. So he would get up, daylight, drive 30 something miles, farm. He'd work all day. And nights I had church, a lot of nights he would come in, just enough time to get cleaned up and come to the church.
Right.
I've seen him many times sitting during the service with his Bible open,
Yeah.
And Dad, he grew up, he went through, he was in World War II, come out of that, and he bought land and uh, cleared it himself. There wasn't no, a lot of big equipment, all that kind of stuff back then. So he cleared it all. He was just a, hard worker. And, but when God called him to preach, he started, preaching but they would never, never miss a lick, it just seemed like,
Yeah.
I thought about even my grandmother, the picture of her on the wall. My granddad died when I was like 7. When we moved up there, I didn't see him much, but my grandmother lived a good while after that, and she drove, and she was driving around the church, going places all the time, and but they never stopped. It was just, they were just all the time involved in the work of God. And, he'd work a job out there on the farm, and he would, do all these things. And we'd have 2 weeks vacation every year. And that'd be right after when school got out, when he got the farm out, when they would get the farm out, he'd have the money. We would go for 2 weeks, and we would go, we'd have one weekend, and then but it's 2 weeks. And wherever we was at, if we went to California, we went Florida, where was that weekend, they were going to find a church for us to go to.
Yeah.
And so we would go to churches you never didn't even know the people or anything. And we'd go Sunday morning, Sunday night, they had service on Sunday night. And, that was just, part of it. We would go, he would drive, and he would fall asleep at night, so he didn't drive that much at night. So he would get up early in the morning, and we would drive, man, miles. And you see a lot of country, but you'd have to see it fast as we were going by, because he wasn't going. He loved to take us places, but he wasn't going to just go and rest, whatever. It was, let's go see this, see that, and see that. So, but those 2 weeks, and man, I've got a lot of memories, with my dad and mom both during those times, but they were just really a lot of fun. But he'd stop, in the morning, and he, first thing let's look for a picnic area. We looked they used to have a lot of picnics along the road. We'd stop. He had a little cook stove, and he'd cook breakfast out there on that thing. Man, that's some of the best breakfasts I ever ate. But we would play and kids stuff, and man, it was just so much fun. But that was just life. It was just those 2 weeks, and then the rest of it was, you was just, you didn't You didn't miss church for nothing, unless you were badly sick or you was,
Right.
we were out of uh, town somewhere on vacation or whatever, and then we went on the weekends.
Yeah. I used to think that I can't add anything else into my schedule. I've got so much between work, ministry, family. If I add something else, I'm gonna pop.
Mm-hmm.
That's just kind of how my mind was.
Mm-hmm.
But then the Lord kept laying on my heart, like patriarchs in the Bible and their roles and responsibilities. And they had not just one role, I mean multiple roles. I
Oh
think
yeah.
about David. He had to be a king, but we know he was a man of war. We know he trained. We know that he went into battle. There were
Mm-hmm.
things that David did. He wasn't just a king,
Right.
and he had family too.
Yeah.
And he was able to implement all of these things. And then I heard a message preached by Aaron Bounds, and he wasn't even preaching about this. He just made a little side note. You can do more than what you think you can do.
Yeah.
And then because of that, I know we had a conversation about it, but I started prioritizing, and nothing else came into play until all of my priorities were taken care of. And what I started to realize is if I cut out any sort of distraction, I've got plenty of time.
Oh yeah.
And there's so much more that you can do. And now you don't have time. Now at the end of the day, I
Yeah.
was I was packed, but everything got done,
Right.
and I didn't feel so tired. My mind, didn't have a bunch of mental stress because I relied on God and I did what
Yeah.
He asked me to do. And then we feel that strength. We
Yeah.
take His burden on, and we wear His yoke, and life is so much easier that way.
Well, you got to think about in those days when they were growing up. There was no technology like it is today. They
Yeah,
didn't have computers. They didn't have, we never had televisions. We never had any of that kind of distractions. It was just, you get up and you go out, you work, you do whatever, and you come home, you go to church, and that was your life. That filled your life. And so today there's so many things that people are distracted by. I'd be like, I got to do this, got to do that, whatever. But I was thinking somebody today, they mentioned, about, well, man, I just don't have time to do that. I'm busy. I said, well, everybody's got the same amount of time.
yeah, 100%.
Everybody's got 24 hours, but it's what you do with that time. You have time to do what you wanted to do,
Yeah,
but, things that that's not important to you, then you don't have time for. And so it's the same way with church. It's the same way with, you know, Dad was real big about preparing something for his kids and his family. He
yeah,
wanted to leave something for us, and so he worked his whole life. Really, I'm doing this for y'all. I'm doing this for y'all. And so, but the church and all of that. Church still going. My sister and her husband pastor now, and there, but it's been there for years. But it's I think it's just your call and your commitment. My dad, uh, someone's asked me just a while ago, they asked me about how did he live for God while he was in the military, you know. And I said, well, first of all, he wasn't in the truth at that time, even though he probably did what he knew to do. He loved
right.
God. He wasn't married, but he really didn't. He had a third grade education. He didn't really know how to read and write. Uh, they liked him so much in the military until they would take his test for him and get everything for him so he could pass it all,
Yeah,
so he could keep moving on because he could do anything, as far as carpenter, mechanic, any kind of work he could do it. But as far as the books and stuff, he didn't, he could read. So, but he learned when he got out of the military, he really learned how to read by reading the Bible.
yeah. That's awesome.
And so when he read that Bible, he could quote that Bible better than you could read it. Most people, and he'd read that thing through so many times. I mean, he pastored for 40 years there in Morehouse. And then the other times he pastored 13 years in Parma and somewhere else, Essex. I think he was there 6 years. So he pastored a lot of years. And I know in Morehouse, every Sunday morning, he would just his little Bible lesson. He would take the Bible and go verse by verse all the way through the New Testament. Every Sunday he would read for a whole hour or so, verse by verse, explaining it, teaching on it. And he did that, going through the no telling how many times in 40 years that he went through that Bible. And he
That's
could just,
awesome.
it was just so embedded in his mind, tell. That's the reason he could come in from farming
Right.
all day and get up there and then preach a message
Right.
because it was so much in his
It was a
mind.
lifestyle.
Yeah, yeah. So
Um, Now, just really quick, I know we'll transition into your how you what you felt. Well, the first time you felt called, you felt a tug in your spirit to live for the Lord. But real quick, you said that he didn't know truth while he was in the military. Do you know the transition from him learning truth and somebody teach him a Bible study or?
well, I just mentioned this a while ago. I was talking to someone is that he came home and he was going to some different churches, and he happened to visit the church where my mom was at,
Yeah.
and I probably her dad was either pastor or they was in that church, and so when he seen her, he wanted to inquire about
Yeah.
about this church,
Yeah.
and so he said, "I got to get to know her." And so I'm going to tell a story for him, but he kept coming and got to know her, and then of course that's when I guess probably my grandfather or somebody sat down with him and
Yeah.
began to explain the Bible, and he come to the truth, and then of course they after got Holy Ghost, got baptized, they got married, and then shortly after that, I think he started preaching. Got a call to preach.
Yeah.
So
That's awesome. That's
that,
such a cool story. I didn't
yeah,
know that.
yeah.
So through this, you're with your parents. Your dad's a farmer. Your mom's a farmer too, or
Well,
they work.
she worked on farms, and I mean, they picked cotton, they did all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
Growing up, it was just, just trying to make ends meet.
At what point did you? Because especially me being in the youth ministry, every young person at some point makes a decision. I'm going to live for the Lord or I'm not. At what point did you make that decision and did you feel a call of God?
Well, I told you we moved when I was 7 years old. So it was that year that I got baptized
Uh huh.
when we moved. So the church that we was in was a smaller church. This church that my dad took was bigger. It had more going on, more young people, whatever. So I guess I kind of probably got more involved in what was going on. I was getting a little older then, we're not old, but I was getting up to know that I needed to do something.
Right.
And because my mom was a praying, did you ever meet her at all?
No.
I wish
I
you could
would.
have.
Yeah, me
Oh
too.
Lord, she was, she was a prayer. She just, uh, and she was bold, bold as, I mean, she wouldn't, if she come to a service and there's somebody over there and they wouldn't doing praying or whatever, she'd go right over there and start praying for them. And she was just that type. Josh has got a lot of her
Yeah, he does.
characteristics.
Yeah.
He talk to you. And he'll try to. That's the way she was. She was just if something's wrong, she gonna go right up to you. Let's get this straight. Uh, Dad, I'm more. I got some of her characteristics as far as the evangelistic part and the, wanting to, just really that type of thing. Dad was more of a teacher, basically, but he was also more patient and, kind of working with people, and he would that type of thing, which I think I get more of that from him,
Hmm.
trying, to help people and work with people. Whereas mom, she would, just pray for him real quick,
Yeah.
and this type of thing. But she was really a prayer warrior. And so they instilled in us so much, growing up. My Lord, uh, not only did we go to church, but it was constant teaching, constant praying, and more so probably mom than even dad, because dad did work. He was gone a lot and coming in, but mom, time got up, she's talking about church or talking about God or something, and then she's going to pray with you, and she's going to, if I ever did something wrong, she takes you in there and she sits there and prays and talks to you about God, talks about what, all of this kind of stuff. So it was just constant. I mean, it was just all the time. Uh, instilling that in me. And so, I know that plays a big part in the call and what my life was going to be. And she really constantly, gave us to God. She prayed over us, and all of us were different. Uh, but my brother, my oldest brother, he was kind of strong, hard headed, real stern, there's no foolishness, whatever. And of course, he started pastoring when he was single, and he pastored for a good long time. And it's his wife that passed away here recently. And, but my other brother in between, he said, man, I'm never going to be a preacher. I don't want to preach. I've seen too much. I've been in this preacher's home all my life. I'm getting out of here. So he takes off, moves to Louisiana. Well, his world just caved in. And so God really led me. I was, of course, I don't know if I was pastoring where I was at that time. Anyway, led me to go down there and just tell him, man, you just got to quit running. God's called you. He has. Just have to pull it together and go back and do what you're supposed to do. Mm-hmm. So he did. He left after he'd lost everything. He came back home and, accepted the call. And he pastored. He's still pastored, but he's pastored for several years awesome. As well. And so we've all been, different. But I think, I got the Holy Ghost. I got baptized when I was 7. I got the Holy Ghost when I was 9. And I think after that, I was really sincere about living for God. I wanted to live for God. I didn't know, I was always cutting up, yeah. I wasn't, my oldest brother, he's a serious, he serious as cancer, but I was just really always joking, doing something, And so I was always into something, just real, I came out like Brooks. Brooks, he, I was just always just, and they teased me, about stuff like that. But I'm very, very hyper, very just
funny
always,
how much he looks like you too. That's
yeah,
little Pastor Lewis.
just always, doing something, and Mom was always having, because Mom would sit on the platform and she would have me up there with her. She would, make me sit there. And because if I ever seen something funny, I couldn't keep from laughing. I'd be laughing, and she'd pinch me or something, And so that's just, all the time. It was just a part of your life. But I remember, I can't say, well, I remember this is the camp or this time that God called me. I think it was just there was a calling on my life really from a real young age.
Right.
Because I remember we'd have neighbors, kids, they'd all come over to play. We had a shed out back of our house, and we'd go out there and we'd play church. Well, I was always a preacher, and I'd, get a little stool up there or something and preach. And I remember going back and I had a little recorder, and I'd record myself preaching. And I was real young at that time. And so when I was probably, I would say 12, 13 years old, I got involved in children's ministry and even teaching classes, Sunday school classes. And so I would, God would begin to anoint me. I would begin I'd be teaching class. And my dad in the church had these walls, these hollow doors that would fold, and you could open up the sides, for if you had a crowd. And then when they did them, we'd just keep them there, and they'd have Sunday school classes. Well, you could hear everything that was going on there. So I would be in there teaching a class, and man, I get to preaching, and I was probably 13, 14 years old at that time. And so, they'd all hear me out there, a bunch of them. And so it was really on every year at New Year's Eve, we'd have a New Year's Eve service. It was just a tradition there that Dad always had a watch night service. Well, every preacher that was there, he'd happen to preach on that watch night service. So the first time that I ever preached behind the pulpit, I didn't even know I was going to. about 10 minutes before, he looked at me and said, "You're next. You're going to preach." And so, man, I didn't have a message or nothing. I didn't know what I was going to preach, you know. So I grabbed the Bible up. I was a nervous
Yeah.
wreck over there. I was 14, maybe 15. I was right in there. So I got that. I had that one where, you know, high time to wake out of sleep that over in Romans. So that was my first message I ever preached behind the pulpit, and that was the text I took. I probably preached 5 minutes, maybe 10 minutes at the most. But I got up there, you know, and did my best.
Yeah.
But that kind of kicked it off,
Right.
started my ministry really, because after that I began to say, hey, you know, I need to start studying the Bible more. You know, I need to start learning something about the Bible. You know, because I sat there, I heard all the time, but I never really liked to read. You know, I was in school, I didn't like school, I didn't like, you know, and so I just really never read that much. I always had a Bible and carried a Bible, but I just never really read, you know, the Bible through. I never did, you know, really read a lot of it. So I started realizing, hey, you know, if I'm gonna preach, I'm gonna have to start learning something.
Yeah.
You know? So I started reading more and you know, learning more about the Bible, because we didn't have computers, we didn't have cell phones, we didn't have any of that. So it was all, you know, just Bible. And you had a concordance or, you know, something like that, topical Bible. And so that kind of where how it all started. And so when I was 16, I guess probably I preached right in that time one of my first revivals. And I went to a church. I went to a church. Brother Godare, Brother Johnny Godare's dad. I don't know if you'd ever met him or not, Herschel Godare. But anyway, he pastored about 30 miles, I guess, away from us. Well, it's Kenny Godare's dad as well.
Okay.
And so Kenny Godare was in church. Well, me and him started together. Our ministry started about the same time. So we both preached our first revival together in his church.
That's awesome.
I preached one night and he preached the next night. I preached one night and he preached the next night. So that was the first revival that I ever preached. And I was probably 16 maybe. And so, you know, I'm sure it wasn't much to the depth of it, but anyway, I was kicking it off.
Right, yeah.
And so, and I even went that summer. I got a revival in Mississippi, Blue Mountain, Mississippi, and I was 16 years old. I remember, and I drove the car down there. Me and there's a couple more guys that was in the friends of mine in the church, and they rode down there with me, and we went down there and preached a revival. I preached a revival a week down there in Mississippi. That was when I was 16.
Yeah, that's
years
awesome.
old.
So, with you being like, what was the connection? Like, how did they hear about you wanting to evangelize, or they know your dad, or?
Yeah, they knew my dad. This particular preacher, he'd been to our church a lot of times, and he knew my dad. They were he was over kind of they had a children's home down there in Blue Mountain, Mississippi, and so my dad supported that, and you know they'd known each other for years.
Yeah.
And so I don't know exactly how the invitation came or whatever. You know, that's one thing. You know, people say, "Well, you had an advantage. You had, you know, your dad was this or that, whatever." But Dad never did. I don't remember calling anybody up.
Right. Yeah.
And tell them, you know, my son, you know, he's preaching or whatever. I didn't write a letter that I know about to anybody. I'm sure he, you know, probably was out or something. He might mention or they might talk about it or something, you know. But I mean, he supported me 100%, and you know, him and Mom was my biggest supporters. But he didn't, you know, my revivals. Of course, God made that way, but my revivals didn't come by Him paving the way for me.
Right. Right.
Revivals came basically by me going and preaching somewhere, and that preacher would tell some other preacher, and then I would get a revival there, and it would just keep going like that.
Going like that. Yeah, that's awesome. So did you always? Now we're having this whole. If you enjoyed part 1, we have part 2 on the way. We are so excited to get this to you. Love y'all. See y'all next time.